This conference actually started because of the similarities that we had seen in our societies. Mainly the reason was that Gideon Levy, who is on the most right in front, a very respectable journalist from Israel, had the time to come to Estonia. And given that before every elections in Israel, there will be some sort of military escalation, sometimes even war, and therefore the policy of the people, of the parties that are in power and are putting forward these kind of emotion are there. It comes from identity politics. It comes from the way how to mobilize from your segment of the society against something other, how to rephrase or frame certain questions or certain issues in a way that the people would feel that they would feel connected with. And it doesn't really have to be always with playing nice at all. And if we're looking at Estonian politics, which you might be a little bit more comfortable talking about, you see similar kind of trends, not in the scale, but in the direction, where certain parties have tried to confront certain minorities or to make some laws that are maybe not inclusive enough. And from these kind of similarities, we thought that we would like to organize a conference which would be centered on the identity, on the way how media is using it to sell, but also how to give support to one political side or the other, given their political needs. And most of all, it's about the way how conflicts develop. It's not like that. One day you wake up and there will be war. There was a lot of stuff beforehand, and to recognize these kind of directions and to recognize the ways how we can split the society because of politics and how to counteract that. This is the reason why this conference was born, and this is also the reason why these honorable people behind the table at the moment are here. So. Without further, I would give the floor to Mr. Krister, who will be managing and who will be the moderator of this discussion. Thank you.
Of course, we have seen here in Estonia how media is playing a crucial role in conflicts. First, right now, what's happening in Ukraine, where two formerly brotherly nations are now branding each other as maybe fascists and with worse names. And then there were a lot of fears, especially in the beginning of the conflict here as well, that the same model could be used in our southeastern part of Estonia because, well, just because of different identities of what people are having. And then finally, yesterday, our parliament passed a law that had extremely intense discussion before in our society, which we had not seen, I think, in the last 20 years. It was about same-sex partnerships. So everything about that is creating an identity. And well, I would just love to give first word to Farid Zareie. He's a social anthropologist from Sweden. But as I understand, your origins are actually from Palestine, and then you are also connected, from Iran, then you're again connected to Afghanistan, so very mixture of things. And well, just go ahead, how does media construct all those things?
I would like to situate the orientation of our discussion concerning media and identity away from mere projects of representation. Because in the neoliberal order of things, even the most oppressed of us can be well adjusted to injustice. That is, you can either compromise your identity or your integrity in order to gain access in certain spaces in media. And the other problem with that is that nobody wants to be only a representation of something. For instance, I recently heard yesterday when I came here, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there's a Estonian television now that has news broadcasting in Russian language.
It It will be probably, who knows?
It will be? Okay. But as one of the greatest linguists actually said, Mikhail Bakhtin, context is always greater than the language itself. It's the language that is external to us. Context is always over the language itself. Therefore, you can be subjectified or victim of racism and still articulate racist ideas. So you can be part of the structure, you can be part of the oppressed culture, and still have some type of representation, some sort of space within media, and still reproduce the same racist ideas. I would like to give 2 examples to support my thesis, and then I will give some suggestions on how we can move on. I remember in 2011, I was living in South London, and there were a few riots there, if you guys remember. And the way media kind of portrayed these so-called riots was that, first of all, it was 3 levels of it. The first level was that they actually depoliticized the whole context away from structural problems to kind of blaming the victims. The second level of that was that the media and people in general, the discourse in Britain and Europe in general, was that they started to actually politicize the same people by asking them to go and vote in order to take personal responsibility for their communities. The same places that experienced these riots and were depoliticized were then politicized and asked to go vote. When voter participation ends up being lower than expected, we don't blame the individual victims or the political system, but rather assign the whole situation as a product of a long tradition of cultural dysfunctionality. So no longer do you blame the individual for their kind of irrational behavior, but you say that this is kind of rational and it's because of cultural dysfunctionality. So those are the 3 levels that media kind of portray these events. And through all of this, the neoliberal order tells us, and this in the neoliberal order you also have the media, which tells us that this is the individual's responsibility to solve all their own problems. Individuals or identities can be authorized, individuals and identities can be unauthorized yet recognized, but you can also be authorized yet unrecognized. So the space in media and the space of our daily discourse is quite limited. And I want to give you another example of what is happening in Sweden right now. Because of the fact that representation has a limited space in media of how you represent identities, something new has happened. We have a discourse of racialized beings, and by racialized beings I mean individuals who are actually subjected to racism and therefore assigned different qualities according to their biological heritage. And because of the limited space in media, limited space of representation, these same racialized beings have created a separatist forum or channels where power structures don't have the priority of interpreting their experiences. So you have a space in media which is their own. You can open up a blog and talk about your experience as a racialized being and not being interpreted by other people who constantly have the power or the priority of interpretation of your experiences. So in order to kind of like talk about what identity is and how you represent them and how you construct them in media, I think we need to talk about the power structures within them. You can't just talk about what's being represented and who's being represented. Because there's always space to compromise your integrity or your identity in order to gain space within certain realms of media. So I think we need to talk about how you can actually counteract these forces by actually talking about, let's create spaces, let's create forums where your identity is central to your discussion and your way of channeling your experiences.
how media creates different ethnicities and how the language helps to create them. I was once living myself in Central Europe, in Czech Republic, where at that time media ceased to use nationalities when they were describing, let's say, different crimes. Before it was obvious that gypsies did, gypsies done, this and that. And it was like a conscious decision by the media there. Here also, quite a long time ago, we ceased to use Russian or Estonian. Of course, the names or surnames tell it by themselves, but still, it was also a conscious decision not to emphasize the role of nationality. But now I will give a word to Jakob Sheikh from Denmark. Also, interesting, different mixture of identity. But so your thesis: how does media? How can media help, or maybe the other way around? How can media endanger the coexistence of different ethnicities and nations?
This is my first time in Estonia, so I'm really happy to be here. Except for the fact that all the other Nordic countries were represented by a flag outside, except for Denmark. I might complain to the hotel manager by that. My name is Jakob Sheikh. I am a staff reporter with the Danish daily national newspaper Politiken, where I mostly do write about marginalizations, radicalization, integration affairs, immigration affairs, social affairs, and occasionally also do cover conflicts. I've been to Syria for 4 times during this conflict, so I kind of have stakes in both topics and concepts that are intertwined in this conference. Also, I do work as a volunteer in an organization which is called Responsible Presse, which is basically the meaning or the reason why I'm here. What we do is trying to strengthen young people in their abilities to understand the media and to encourage them to use the media and be more open about what media does, but also critical towards what the media, what impact the media has. I only have a 10-minute presentation, so I'm going to skip this video. I was about to show you a video which is basically an average media television clip, which basically means no content, just form. And the reason why I was about to show you that is because when there's no content in the news, which goes for a lot of the stories in the news at the moment, basically what we have left is the form. And when it comes to form, the language is basically what's left. And my point today is that the language is crucial in the media, and the way we shape different things is crucial to how we understand things. And I could talk about a lot of different cases today. I could talk about media everywhere. I'm going to talk about media in Denmark because that's where I'm from. That's what I do know. And also I could use a lot of different areas in where media is creating a problem. I'm choosing ethnicity today. I could also have chosen the gender issue or issue about disabled people. But basically, in Denmark, I don't know about Estonia, but in Denmark we do have 2 different words for the same thing. People like myself are called second-generation immigrants. Like we have Pakistani heritage, for instance, as myself, but was born and raised in Denmark. This is one term used, second-generation immigrants. And when I show people this word, usually what comes into mind is negative associations. This concept is usually associated with criminal affairs and problems, immigration problems. And we also have, well, this is a direct translation, so I'm not sure it even goes in English, but we call them New Danes, which is basically meaning the same thing, but it has a completely different association, a much more positive association. And I'm not telling you whether or not the first or the second term is better or worse. I'm just trying to make myself clear about the fact that language really does matter. And it does matter because words, they mean something and they also shape our reality. And I'm going to say that a couple of times today until you kick me out of this room. But I really do think it's so important. Because you can talk in an exclusive way or in an inclusive way. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples of that. This is actually an article from my same newspaper. We have a lot of issues in Denmark about Muslims. I guess it not only goes for Denmark but also for other countries. But in Denmark there's a huge debate about how the Muslim minority groups are socialized and how they are, interacting with the Danish community.
Switch.
Is this better? Okay. Well, this is actually the same story. This is the story on the front page, and then it leads into the front page of the debate section. So what the editors thought while doing this story was that how can we investigate whether or not Muslims and Danish people like each other, in a way. So they did a survey, like a scheme they sent out to a couple of thousand Danish people, asking them, would you like your son or daughter to be married to a Muslim? And they did the same thing about Muslims, asking them, would you like your son or daughter to be married to a Danish person? So, can anybody here today tell me what the problem is with that story? No? Then I'll give you the answer. This story, we have an interview with a Danish mother telling me, no way, my bloody son will not get married to a Muslim. And this is a Muslim man telling that his daughter should never be married to a Danish person. The problem is, why can you not be Danish and Muslim at the same time? And I don't even know how this story got into my newspaper. I'm pretty embarrassed about it. But that is the association that we often make, the mistake that we often make, which I find quite problematic. And usually we talk about, use this exclusive language when it is associated with negative things. As soon as it is about positive things, they're not Muslims, or they're not foreigners, they're Danes. This is Caroline Wozniacki, the Danish tennis player, and this is a pop group in Denmark called Outlandish, which consists of Muslims. But they're not just outlandish, they're the Danish outlandish, because they have success. And Caroline Wozniacki, when she was in the US Open final, she held her speech in Polish, because her parents are from Poland. But we still consider her Danish because she adds something positive to a Danish community, right? And it's not just something that happened before. This was from yesterday. It was I was watching television and there was a story about why in the Danish Football League, why we have so few new Danes having their breakthrough in Danish football. And basically the story circled around that issue. What does it take to be part of the Danish community in society in general and on the football field? And this is one of the guys that actually has success. And he was asked, like, do you feel part of the Danish community? And when when the television station presented him, it says his name, his club, and then Moroccan. This guy was born in Denmark. Both his parents have been living in Denmark for 40 years. He's been playing for the Danish national team, youth team. So basically, this pretty much says it all. So basically, what we're discussing in Danish media right now is like, what does it take to be one of us? What does it take to be part of our community? And for the last year, I've been a couple of times to Syria, but I've also been writing a lot about foreign fighters in Denmark, people from the Muslim communities in Denmark that goes abroad to fight in Syria. This is a guy named Kenneth. He converted to Islam when he was 18 years old, went to Somalia, to Yemen, and eventually went to Syria and died there. This is a guy called Victor. He was a straight A student, 21 years old, from Aarhus in Denmark, and within 6 months he converted to Islam, got radicalized and went away to Iraq, blew himself up in Iraq as a suicide bomber. And these two guys, Musharraf and Shiraz, are part of the militant Salafi group in Denmark. And what's interesting about these persons is when we watch the news about them, we have a completely different approach. I've just taken out an example of how we covered the issues in Denmark. Danish radio, had a story that was called "How Could It Happen?" Like this guy, a Danish guy, how could he blow himself? How could he go to Syria and fight there? And this guy, a young blonde man from Aarhus, turned his back to his society. These persons are framed as like, how could one of us, be radicalized in that way? These people were also born and raised in Denmark. These were basically they came from the same sort of class in society, but our approach to these guys are completely different. He was a product of the radical Islamist environment in Copenhagen, one story says. So it's just important for me to underline the fact that we kind of treat people differently, and that's also one of the main issues here. We're talking about them, but not with them. That's basically what you can say. 75% of the stories in Danish media about Muslims or Islam does not contain a single Muslim voice. So we're writing about Muslims, we're writing about Islam, but not necessarily talking to the people. And when we do talk to them, it's either when it comes to integration affairs or criminal affairs. It's quite rare that we talk with these people with new Danes in other contexts. So does we have a problem? I do think we have a problem. The problem is that people basically don't trust media anymore in Denmark. When I go around to schools, primary schools in Denmark, and speak to young people, especially the ones with ethnic minority backgrounds, they simply tell me that we don't trust what's in the media. And when you ask them why that is, they usually tell me that it's because they don't feel, they feel excluded by the media. They cannot recognize themselves in the media, so they don't see why the media can offer them anything. So we're talking a lot about, that's one problem. Another problem is we're talking a lot about freedom of speech in Denmark. I guess all you guys know the Muhammad cartoons, right? So freedom of speech is like a buzzword in Denmark, or a buzz concept. But when it comes to ethnic minority groups and they are presented in the media, they're sort of they can talk about anything, but they're asked about specific issues. In 2006, when we had the first female ethnic minority woman being elected into the parliament, she was very eager to talk about her field of expertise, which was technology, IT, education. And what do you think the Danish journalist asked her about? How is your own view towards homosexual people? Like, do you feel that they have to be stoned? These kind of issues. So, and she had to go through answering these questions before she was able to talk about what she was actually knowing something about. The last thing I want to underline today is that this is actually one of my colleagues in Politiken newspaper, and I don't have anything against him, but he pretty much underlined one of my main points today. People in the media look alike. They're white, at least in Denmark. I know this doesn't necessarily go for other countries, but they're white men. They're between 35 and 55 years of age. They usually come from the main cities. They're working at national newspapers, television, radio. They've been around for like 50 years in the media business, and they earn some kind of the same. So where does that leave us? When people look alike, they think alike, and they make sort of the same stories. In my own newspaper, we had 170 staff reporters in 2011, and 2 got a non-Western background, which can be sort of a problem when you're covering things that goes on in the Arabic world. Not to say that just because you know Arabic you have to cover that topic, not necessarily, but it's just quite interesting. So what should we do about it? I'm going to speed up and down a little bit. A couple of years ago we had a whale that stranded on a beach in Denmark, and when it was dead it had to be dissected. So what we did was basically writing a story about the dissection of the whale, and the guy that was in charge of that dissection was Abdi, this guy, and he's pretty much a pretty normal guy dissecting a whale. He's not an Arabic guy talking about criminality or ethnic minority issues, but he's basically just talking about what he does. And that might seem very basic, even so basic that I don't have to mention it here in this forum, but this is the way, I guess, to turn this thing around. Like if you're covering an issue on environment, go find the most incredible environment expert, and if his name is Mufassarabat, talk with him anyway. And this is basically what we don't do in Danish media, because you think, this guy, he doesn't speak English, or maybe he's like weird or something. I kind of tried to do that myself when I went to Syria the last time. I wanted to write not about necessarily the conflict, but the humanitarian work that also is going on in the conflict zone, and to follow a humanitarian organization. And I basically just wanted to find an organization that was working at that very area in Syria where I was going to, and it just happened to be a Muslim organization. The story here is not necessarily about Muslim aid workers, it's just about aid workers, and they just happen to be Muslim. And I believe that this might be the way of turning things around. So basically my argument is that we have to think about how we cast our sources, and also, which would be my last note today, minorities can be lots of things. Now I've been talking about ethnic minorities, but it could just as well be, it could be disabled people. This is a very funny story that this guy's a famous artist. He just happened to sit in a wheelchair, and when my colleague was writing that story, the secretary at the news desk was very confused, because he didn't write that this guy was sitting in a wheelchair, and he was like, why should I? So he wrote that story, and when he saw it in the newspaper the next day, he got pretty angry, because in this small box here about this guy, it says in the very end here, he sits in a wheelchair. It's like, yeah, we can see that. Like, why does it have to be underlined? Like, if this guy was an Arabic artist, why do we have to write this guy's an Arab? I mean, and it also goes in terms of writing about genders. This guy, Matthew McConaughey, the famous actor, we did a large profile on him because he basically did shitty films before, and now he does great films. And this headline says this six-pack has now got a brain. And it created a huge fuss internally at my newspaper, because the argument was that if this was Angelina Jolie, do you think we would have written, the cleavage has got brain, or the boobs have got a brain? No, we definitely wouldn't have done that, and that would have been so wrong. And this is also wrong as well. But we are also making a lot of mistakes when it comes to. I don't want to call women a gender minority, but in terms of media presence, they are definitely a minority. So minority groups can be lots of things, and I'll be happy to hear your point of views, and thank you for letting me talk here.
Thank you for your, I would say, shocking description of Danish media, because it showed us how long way we are having here in Estonia. We are having the same problems. I was myself a bit hoping that it might be different in the Western world, but it doesn't seem to be so. But now let's give a word to Raivo Vetik. He's a famous scholar from Tallinn University, and as we saw right now in Estonia a huge polarization of public opinion and branding of people just because of the law on same-sex couples. We found out that to create an enemy is one of the easiest things to do. So maybe this would be a good starting point for you.
It is a very topical issue. Actually, I'm happy about two facts in respect of this law. First, I'm happy that the law was passed. Second, I'm happy because there was so strong resistance to the law. I think it is most important thing in society that there is debate going on. It is not so important that one side wins and another side does not win. I think the most important thing in this respect is that we had a huge discussion during last half year. But in my presentation, I'm happy to give Estonian perspective to the same topic, which is based on media monitoring. We carried out a few years ago. I'll be showing some slides, figures, which will be self-explanatory. It is in Estonian language, but figures will be self-explanatory. In the beginning, I would like to give you a comparison of Danish way of constructing us and them, and the Estonian way of constructing categories us and them. As we heard, in Denmark you have Danes and New Danes. In Estonia we have Estonians and non-Estonians. This is quite a huge difference. But in this media monitoring, first we covered most important online sources. In Estonia we are interested in what kind of minorities are represented and how they are represented. We figured out that there are 8 main groups of minorities, like Russians, black section minorities, persons with disabilities, etc., etc. And I would like to give you some main results of this survey. First, tonality of articles, and second, content of articles. Red means neutral, green means negative, and blue means positive. As you see, mostly Estonian media coverage of minorities is neutral, it is politically correct. Now, if you look coverage of different types of minorities, again, red is negative, green is neutral, and blue is positive. And actually, it is extremely interesting finding. If you look which type of minority is covered most negatively in Estonia, you see it is Muslims. We have very few Muslims in Estonia, and those Muslims whom we have, they are very pro-Estonia. We do not have any problem with our own Muslim, and our analysis figured out that this coverage is mostly foreign news, which were translated into Estonian language and commented with certain words by Estonian journalists. So the result is that the minority whom we do not have is the most negatively stereotyped in Estonian media. Very good news was that the Russian minority stands comparatively well in this figure. Now the content of articles, again the same comparison between different minorities, and here you see that Asians, Roma people, Muslims and blacks get most negative coverage in respect of the content of the article. And again, you can say that these are people who are not very much represented in Estonia. Now, important topic we try to figure out is the voice of minorities in these articles. Blue means that there is no voice represented. Red means there are some citations, and green means that the voice is a minority is fully covered. You see the picture in 88% of the articles, no voice for minorities. Now, next topic: what kind of minorities get voice in Estonian media? And here you see that persons with disabilities and sexual minorities. So my conclusion would be that in general Estonian media coverage of minorities is neutral. However, there are some minorities who are covered quite negatively. And there is a lot of mythology in Estonian media. There is very intensive debate regarding some minorities who are not actually represented in Estonian society. Thank you.
Take the Presse.
Okay, thank you very much. And we have a couple of minutes left, and I think as we started a bit later than I allow it to run over. As for the discussion, as we have limited time, I don't ask myself. I saw that you were writing. I don't agree. So,
Oh,
point please.
okay. Yeah. I mean, thank you so much for your presentations. There are a few things that I was thinking about when both of you were talking. On the last point, the professor said that some 3% of minorities in Estonia get a voice in media. And so I would like to kind of define what that even means. What does it mean to get a voice? Whose voice is it? What is the voice? What is it said? What is the substance? I mean, you can always, like I said in my presentation, you can always have a person of a minority group, a background, being represented in media, but not necessarily having your ideas represented in media. Those are two very different things. And I was also thinking about, I was thinking about your example about how we should write a story about people who are of minority backgrounds that is not necessarily about, what do you think about stoning? What do you think about Islam, etc., etc.? And we should just write neutral stories about what they do. And I was wondering, because one of the risks of doing that is actually to deodorize and sanitize the discussion. There's the situation that they kind of experienced as subjects and people who are subjected to racism and stereotypes. So by just talking about what they do in their daily lives and not talking about the structural problems when interviewing them, you kind of sanitize the discourse. And by sanitizing, I mean you kind of move away, you distance yourself from actually taking responsibility over the issues and the problems that we're all dependent on. So you become blind to the problem. So those are my only kind of concerns. And I wish we could talk more about the substance of the discourse.
Any comments?
Yes. Well, yeah, that's a very interesting point and a very important point. From one time to another, I get interviewed by other media. I'm not interviewing, but I get interviewed. And I am constantly framed as the Pakistani journalists, like, how were you able to succeed in Danish society? And I'm like, shut the fuck up. Because basically, I mean, I might be subject to racism, I might be subject to discrimination, but what I really do want to talk about is my job and my passion, and I think a lot of people share my view. I'm not saying that we should neglect these problems, because we definitely shouldn't, but in the case of the guy that was dissecting the whale, I think it would be kind of malplaced to talk about structural racism there. But I completely agree that we should not neglect these problems. they just have to be discussed in whenever that's relevant. So that's just one point I want to make clear. Another point was basically regarding your question to the professor about having a voice in media. The problem in Denmark is that your sources pretty much look like yourself. So if you're a white man in the 50s, your sources are more often white men in the 50s. We have research on that, proving that. And the problem is here that if you don't have sources in ethnic minority groups, you tend to use stereotypes. So either you are interviewing the imam with the long beard, who has who is given the voice on behalf of a whole group that might not even agree, or the suppressed woman wearing a headscarf. And the problem with that is that it kind of reinforces the stereotypization of these ethnic minority groups, and it neglects the diversity of that group. And I think that the media has to be very well aware that we should not see these people as a group sharing the completely same view, but pay attention to the diversity of that group.
Okay. If I said that the 3% in 3% of articles minority gets voice, then I meant that these articles are opinion pieces written, for example, minorities themselves, or most of the content is their own point of view, which means that these 3% are really voice of minority, which is of course very, very small number, and I totally agree to a point in respect of kind of surface coverage and focusing on structural problems. I think this is the most important problem in media, that we tend to stay on this surface level, not to see what is behind that.
Okay, now in order to give voice to others than us here, can I take one group? Yes, please.
Hi.
Just a second.
Should I? Hi, thank you. My name is Eugenia. I'm from Lithuania, but actually residing in Denmark. And my question is, we heard from you about a problem, that there is a problem. And I definitely agree with you, and I don't think it's a problem of Denmark or Estonia, it's also a problem of Lithuania, and I think it's a problem of global media in general. Since 9/11, there is growing Islamophobia, and media does play a role in that. And I want to hear if you have seen any positive campaigns, or if you know any practical solutions that have been done to tackle the problem. So I'm more interested in solutions. I know you mentioned suggestions, but I would like to hear if you know already successful stories that we can look at and take as examples for, let's say, Lithuanian media or any other country. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. In terms of campaigns, I'm not really aware of specific campaigns, but I am aware of several initiatives in media, not in Danish media, but especially in British media, and because they're kind of a leading actor in this. One local newspaper has set up a Muslim committee that meets with the editor every second month to not to be like a judge, but to discuss whether or not the coverage of ethnic minority groups aligns with reality. Another newspaper has made a focus group of Muslim people that has to review the newspaper every once in a while. Yet another newspaper has made a monthly section called Asian Eye for the predominantly Muslim community, writing news about what happened in their community. So there, I think you have 3 different initiatives. Another Carlson TV has set up an understanding the media course for ethnic minority businesses, trying to encourage them to to use media as not as a partner, but as an advantage rather than a disadvantage. So I guess that's some initiatives that we could use.
Could I? There are several campaigns out there that work on these issues. I mean, one of them really is, and this is not something that I actually support at all, because it is very problematic. One of them is Malala Yousafzai. There's a book about her. She just won the Nobel Prize just today. If you look at her and what she means, what her role is in the European context, is that she is quite diverse. You know, some people with the liberal feminist movement in Europe, people kind of praise her as the savior of, you know, young women, young Afghan Pashtun women in Pakistan and Afghanistan. While if you show the same picture, and if you show the same, if you kind of portray the same role to young Muslim men and women in Western countries, they would get kind of upset, because it's kind of a neoliberal practice of raising one individual to the skies and saying this is the example that everyone should live up to. I mean, she's obviously very strong, very courageous, but she cannot be the only, I mean, you can't make individuals and structures, oppressive structures, into campaigns, right? That's very problematic. So I think that what we need to look at is, one example that we have in Sweden, which is amazing, is 4 women in the ages of 18 to 25, just for about 2 years ago, started a blog, alternative media, really, which is called Rummet. Rummet means the room, and where they actually discuss their experiences as black and racialized women, so the intersectionality of their identities as being children of immigrants, or children of, 2 different cultural backgrounds, and their experience of being black in Sweden. And nobody's in that room, nobody has the priority to interpret their experience other than themselves. So we need to look at those channels. Those are absolutely one of the most amazing things that are happening in European context.
Okay, thank you. Time is pressing. One more, and that's it.
My question is to Raivo. It's in your presentation, I saw that a lot of Russians, for me at least, it's surprising, get most neutral articles and also are quite positive. What could be the reasons behind it? Because a lot of times people mention that there's still a lot of Russophobia, and people still, like in real life, they treat Russians not very positively. But in media, it's on the little bit other side, it's quite positive. But what could be reasons behind it?
Yeah. Okay, I think the most important reason is that we covered half a year, and I think there was about 1,500 articles and pieces of news we covered. And if you take this long period altogether, then you see that actually the situation is not so bad at all. But there are of course examples which get a lot of media attention, but these examples are not so widespread. In general, I think we are not so bad, but kind of some extreme cases they get so much attention that we have feeling that there is a big problem in Estonian media.
Okay, thank you to the wonderful panelists, and we move on to more practical issues as war and media conflicts. Media coverage there. Thank you.